live from SABC studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this Thursday edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko. Thank you for tuning in. On the show this evening,
in favor of Retief Odendaal 60. Yeah!
We introduce you to Nelson Mandela Bay's new mayor. What drives him? Will his election finally bring to an end to the almost 6 years of chaos and confusion that the more than 1.2 million South Africans who live there have had to go through? But before that, a profile interview. We first ask the Eastern Cape's Cooperative MEC what he makes of the latest development and the chaotic way in which it came about. We then move on to talk about the country's National Development Plan, which was adopted on this day 10 years ago. Has it delivered the goods?
Eskom is too vital to our economy and it cannot be allowed to fail. Eskom is our collective responsibility as a nation.
And on a day Eskom makes an about turn on its earlier promise to give us a reprieve today, announcing instead that Stage 5 will continue well into the weekend. We take you down memory lane to remind you of some of the promises that were made over the years when we were told that a situation like the one we are in today won't happen again. All that coming up in today's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now.
In favor of Retief Odendaal 60. Yeah!
Well, the announcement last night of the election of a new mayor for Nelson Mandela Bay, and we will be speaking to him in a short while. But I'm hoping that before I introduce my next guest, we're going to show you some visuals of what happened prior to the election of the mayor in the wee hours of the morning. Some of the scenes that preceded the election of the mayor in the early hours of this morning. Democratic Alliance councillor got 60 votes against the ANC's 59. The ANC, of course, represented by Wandisile Chikeka. This after the council had earlier passed a motion of no confidence against the ANC's Eugene Johnson, who had been mayor since November. My first guest is the province's MEC for Cooperative Governance, Mr. Zolile Williams. Mr. Williams, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. I was deliberate about starting with those visuals that preceded the election of the mayor hours earlier. The kinds of visuals none of us would have wanted to see. They say so much about what is going on in that municipality, don't they?
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to the viewers. Yes, Vuyo, the visuals that you have just shown, they are actually saddening. and deeply worrying, especially about the future of the residents of the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro. I'm deeply worried about those incidents. And it's not the first time, Vuyo. You've talked about 6 years of chaos and instability. And I would argue that these are the results of coalition governments. They have characteristics of being unstable. And in my view, Vuyo, I've got about 5 permutations that I have summarized in terms of coalition governments, just as a framing of our discussion this evening. First, Vuyo, all coalition governments lack institutional integrity, especially as it relates to compliance with laws and regulations. Secondly, Vuyo, in order to be part of a coalition, parties must then compromise their ideological orientations. Thirdly, those small parties with 1 member or 2 in the council actually have tyranny on everyone who is having a bigger share of seats in the council. So you'll find the tyranny of small parties in this environment. The 4th permutation, Vuyo, is that the democratic view of the citizens gets subverted for the interests of the parties in the government or in council. And the last one, Vuyo, is that there's less focus on service delivery. And this is what we're seeing in the case of Nelson Mandela. And at international level, Vuyo, if I may remind you, in 2010, the Liberal Democrats in Britain go out and vote and campaign for free education. They actually campaign at universities for free education. But they are unable to amass sufficient votes. And then when time comes for them to go to government, they join forces with the conservatives, whose ideologies are contradictory. What happens then? After the students have voted for the Liberal Democrats, then when they get into council, into government, the conservatives, because they were having a majority, they then decide that your views of free education cannot be fulfilled by this government. And therefore, we are going to instead increase free education. In fact, we are going to increase education by 2/3. And, you know, the representative of the Liberal Democrats, you know, was quite frustrated because now he abandoned the voter.
Allow me to come in there. MEC. I mean, I allowed you to give us that background to perhaps give our viewers a sense of where you are coming from. But everything you've said has been well documented. You're correct in almost every respect, and those issues have been ventilated over time, in fact since November, because when the coalition governments, the voters gave us, have led to all the problems that you've spoken about manifesting themselves, and of course with the implications for the political players. But where we are right now is at a point where we've had to accept that that's the reality of what the voters have given us. And numerous people along the way have roles to play. What we saw last night, for example, it's been known for months now that the DA and its coalition partners have been working on what they have since achieved. And people like you have had options. For example, Section 12, which your political party, from a conversation I had with the Premier and the chairperson of your party in the province, said he reckons that's the way to go, because you're then going to force political parties to work together in the interests of the people of Nelson Mandela Bay. And the question I'm asking you first is why that didn't happen.
All right. Vuyo, look, there were representations from various parties to request that the time allocated for them to submit comments was not sufficient. They wanted to be given space to submit those comments. At the end of that period, we received about 2 comments. And therefore, I was open to say, no, it's fine. Let's extend the period of comments so that no one feels that he or she has not been given sufficient time to participate in this process. So that extension has been granted, and I can't wait for the day when that time comes for the expiry of the time period for submissions. So that, because my view, Vuyo, is that the only institutional framework that has got great possibilities to bring about stability will be us implementing Section 12 notice and actually changing the nature of the municipality and the type into a collective executive system.
You don't think that, those who have just won are then going to turn around and say to you, now that your political party has lost, you're seeing the need to do this, why couldn't you do it before, notwithstanding those requests? Because I don't know if those political parties you're talking about actually gave you very good and tangible reasons as to why they wanted a postponement.
Look, Vuyo, it will be wrong, grossly wrong, to think that my political party would want to introduce Section 12 because there's some perceived benefit. There's no benefit or advantage to the ANC at all in introducing Section 12. In fact, all the parties, the majority parties, ANC, DA, EFF, and Northern Alliance, are the possible parties that will govern Nelson Mandela. So it is a misconception to think that this will advantage the ANC. There's no advantage at all, because a group of parties will be participating in that government, which will be more stable than what is.
Hence, an argument can be made that you should have been a lot more decisive, a lot more, much earlier, given the history of this. Because we're talking about 6 years here of this toing and froing, made worse, of course, by the result of last November's poll, which then made the situation even much more complex. Hence, an argument, I'm saying, can be made that you should have been a lot more decisive this time around. Because if you look at the numbers, that gave Nelson Mandela Bay what it has now, one political party from the coalition partners can unscramble the whole thing, and the region is back, the municipality is back to square one. That's just a fact. The difference of 1 or 2 votes doesn't, count for much. So why give it more time? Why?
Look, Vuyo, I must be reasonable in the final analysis. If there's a reasonable request that parties feel that they need time to consult their legal experts in order to submit proper submissions to participate in this comment period. Remember, Vuyo, there's a possibility of being taken to court in respect of this matter. Now, I do not want court to come back and say, but MEC, you have failed to give parties reasonable time to submit theirs, as if there's something to benefit from the MEC on this matter. So my view is that I have allowed, the best thing is to err on the side of caution. Whilst I'm desperate to ensure that I bring about stability in Nelson Mandela, but the process to achieving that is very important and critical. Because if I don't do that, then I'll be taken to court and that Section 12 will never be seen. So those are challenges that one must consider, especially when you have the authority of the state.
Two quick ones, MEC. One, at a personal level, or from where you sit, you don't think that the requests for more time and so on was all a facade, because these people knew what had been going on and knew where they stood with these things? Yes, no?
Vuyo, it could be a facade. Look, as I've said to you about those permutations, the smaller parties have actually said in one meeting that, you see, if this ANC brings about Section 12 notice, we are burying ourselves alive as smaller parties. And now my interest is not to be listening to those issues, is to look at the interests of the people of Nelson Mandela, and that we must bring about stability in that municipality so that service delivery can take place in Nelson Mandela. I'm worried, Vuyo, in the past few years, we've got 5 mayors with Mr. Odendaal now being elected. In the first term, we had 3 mayors. Now, in this term, we are 7-8 months after local government. We already have 2 mayors. It just shows that this thing is not working, but we must be circumspect when we arrive at the conclusion of it and not be desperate to fix it and in the process create legal problems which will stop us from even finalizing what we intended.
Well, I must say, I'm just hoping that by doing so, you're not prolonging the suffering, the inconvenience, and everything that went with that of the people of that municipality. But let me thank you very much for agreeing to come to talk to us this evening, the MEC for Cooperative Governance in the Eastern Cape, and that's Mr. Zolile Williams. So who is the new Nelson Mandela Bay Mayor? Well, Councillor Retief Odendaal joins me on the line from Gqeberha. Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for your time. I suppose congratulations are in order.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. It's lovely being with you tonight.
Well, your party has been at it for months. You've worked hard to put this thing together. But given the experience of that municipality with these coalition arrangements, you know, not everyone is breathing a sigh of relief, saying, "Phew," at last, because anything can happen from tomorrow.
Well, I think one must realize that Nelson Mandela Bay has been an absolutely broken city over the last couple of months. We've seen how service delivery has come to an absolute grinding halt, and that is a direct result of the ANC's inability to get their coalition to work. Now, it's very important to focus on that, because the ANC collapsed their own coalition because they started to mislead and lie to their coalition partners. Those coalition partners came to us and said to us that they can no longer be in a coalition government with the ANC because they just can't trust him, and that their brand are actually being tarnished by the inability of the ANC government to deliver services in Nelson Mandela Bay. Be under no illusion that this is going to be a very difficult coalition to manage. It's a big coalition. But the reality is that coalition governments are here to stay. Political parties must realize that they must put their own selfish needs aside and work together for the interest of the public.
Let's be honest, though. I mean, your former coalition partners have said the same about the DA previously. Some continue to say that about the DA elsewhere in the country, here in Gauteng and 2 metros, for example. So it's not something unique to the ANC per se, but on a day like this, I'll allow you to, of course, pat yourselves in the back for having managed this process up until now. But you do, or you must concede that it is a very delicate relationship and it's going to require something extraordinary for you to be able to manage it and maintain this, but more importantly, deliver for the people of that municipality.
Absolutely. And as I've said, it is a big coalition. It's not going to be easy. But one must remember that there is one slight difference between Nelson Mandela Bay and the other metros where there's coalitions. And that is that we got a very different electoral result here. And that no matter how you put a government together, you're going to have to put a coalition government together. And at the end of the day, we've also seen that in between 2016 and 2018, when the DA and its coalition partners governed Nelson Mandela Bay, that there was really an improvement in service delivery, and the city was actually making a lot of progress. But unfortunately, subsequent coalitions were not successful in bringing stability in Nelson Mandela Bay, which unfortunately undid a lot of the good work that was done in those 2 years. Let us just remember, between 2016 and 2018, the city went through from the second least trusted city in South Africa to the second most trusted city. It got a AAA credit rating from Moody's, and that all within less than 18 months. That took some doing.
Bragging rights aside, what have you built into the relationship you've now forged with these coalition partners, that which perhaps didn't exist before, in previous relationships, that is, or coalition arrangements?
Very, very important. And hopefully that is something that all coalition governments will use as the basis and foundation of their coalition. It's a trust relationship. We had very difficult coalition discussions, negotiations, but it was based on trust. Because I've noted that the past coalition with the ANC in Nelson Mandela Bay collapsed because there were absolutely no trust between the coalition partners. They didn't trust one another. They couldn't sit in the same room. And we made it very, very clear that we can have the difficult conversations, but we want to be honest with one another. We don't want to mislead one another and try and put things on the table that maybe will never become a reality. At the end of the day, a coalition, especially a coalition as big as this one, has to be based on a relationship of trust. There can't be a trust deficit. If you get a trust deficit, what has happened with the ANC coalition will happen again with subsequent coalitions.
And what is Retief himself bringing, in addition to whatever it is as a party you've sat down, put together, and invited these people to come join you around? What is Retief himself bringing to the party?
Well, I believe that I have a lot of institutional knowledge. I've been a councillor in Nelson Mandela Bay for more than a decade. During that time, I was the political head of finances, and I was the last one that brought additional grant funding into the city, grant funding for which the city was rewarded because of excellent financial prudency. So I've got the institutional knowledge, but I also think that I'm somebody that's relatively easy to work with. I understand local government. I'm an attorney by trade, and I know municipal legislation. I know how municipalities work, and I've been in government. But at the end of the day, I'm a team player, and I think that we'll go a long way to keep this coalition government together.
The problems of the metro are well documented. 9 billion rands in debt, tens of thousands of potholes rather, sewerage problems across the city. We know about the big ones, day zero, that is. We know about crime. We know how your municipal workers, get robbed, mugged. They can't do their jobs even where, there's a will and an ability or capacity to actually go out there and fix, some of the problems. Where are you going to even begin?
I think with the basics, we're going to try and start to fix council. Anybody that watched some of the footage yesterday would have realized that Nelson Mandela Bay Council is broken. And where your council is broken, there can be no effective oversight over the administration. At one stage yesterday, the ANC and the EFF actually stormed the stage and stole one of the ballot boxes. We had to start the voting process over again simply because the ANC wouldn't give over power in a democratic process and a democratic vote. So we're going to start in council to bring stability. There's a big difference between the coalition government that the ANC had, which was a minority coalition government, and the coalition government that we have put together now, which is a majority coalition government. But at the end of the day, it also comes down to leadership. In Nelson Mandela Bay, the ANC couldn't even get their mayoral committee to sit and take decisions. And where political leadership can't take decisions, officials can't implement policy, and that leads to a total breakdown in service delivery, and we've seen it. One of the most shocking examples is the fact that housing delivery in a city where there's 110,000 unit backlog in housing delivery, they've managed to only build 28 housing units up till June this year. It is an absolute travesty, and it just goes to show how inept the ANC administration was. Well,
I'm glad you mentioning that and in that vein, because you'll recall that when the mayoral committee couldn't meet, officials had no direction, offices were closed. We were told of stories of investors who came to the city to honor meetings that were scheduled, only to find doors are closed. What happens then when you are in such a crisis because for one reason or the other you can't agree with your coalition partners? Because what has tended to happen in the past is that things have come to a standstill, and you require big investors like the people who came now, for the cricket, or your Kucha development corporations, or your Volkswagens, or any of the other big players, your General Motors who are there. When they want decisions taken and taken now, they need agility. Meanwhile, you are busy fighting among yourselves as politicians. What sort of deadlock breaking mechanisms, what are you putting in place to make sure that in the event the unfortunate happens, you will still be able, or the municipality will still be able to run? What have you learned from what the ANC and whoever have done in the past, that which brought things to a standstill? And how are you going to navigate those waters when those eventualities happen?
Well, I think, first of all, I must say that I've been lucky that in the coalitions that I've been involved, which was obviously DA coalitions with coalition partners, we've never had a situation where there was such a breakdown in trust that our committees couldn't sit because coalition partners wouldn't talk to one another. You see, unfortunately, I think that the ANC is just not prepared to share power. They are bullies in coalitions. They don't understand how it works. It's a foreign concept. And that's why their coalitions normally end up in absolute chaos. I've already said the one big thing that we have learned from the ANC is just how important it is to be transparent with coalition partners, but very, very important. I think that coalition partners and coalitions realized that in 2024, there is a real chance that we will be able to bring the ANC to below 50% nationally. So for us to convince voters, the electorate and South Africans to consider voting for an alternative to the ANC, we must be able to prove that coalition governments work. And I think more and more coalitions and coalition partners realize just that.
Okay, while we're trying to bring up a tweet or two, quickly, your view on the, I don't know if you're listening to me speaking to the MEC earlier. So Section 12 hasn't been ruled out. Actually, he says he's been waiting because political parties wanted more time, so he felt he should give them more time. But he firmly believes that Section 12 is the way to go. That's what will bring about stability. You'll be forced to share. And, you know, in that arrangement, you stand a much better chance of delivering than is the case at the moment, where it could happen tonight even. One of your coalition partners wakes up saying, I'm no longer in this. Sorry, I'm out of here. And it unravels the whole thing. Your thoughts on Section 12?
Well, it's very interesting that the MEC and his predecessor actually decided to implement this process, because it will just result in a hung council. There's 10 positions in a collective executive, and it will give rise to a hung council where there would be two coalitions that could possibly only get 5 each. But more importantly, we must ask ourselves, why does the MEC want to implement it in Nelson Mandela Bay? Just down the road, there's another metro. It's called Buffalo City Metro. That is one of the worst run metropolitan municipalities in the country. I know because I was a member of the provincial legislature until 2 months ago. And I had a house in Buffalo City that sat without electricity for 5 months because the municipality couldn't even replace a transformer.
Well, it doesn't collapse. It doesn't collapse.
No collective executive on the cards for Buffalo City.
Well, it doesn't collapse the way Nelson Mandela does.
No. They are shooting on the city managers there. We've seen how there's been numerous assassination attempts in Buffalo City. And if you look at the financial precarious situation that Buffalo City is in, you ask yourself, why does the MEC not want to bring a collective executive? And the answer is because the ANC has got a majority there. So maybe the MEC must be honest and say, we'll bring a collective executive in both metropolitan municipalities, and then we can talk. But we'll give him the fight of his life here in Nelson Mandela Bay, because a collective executive will not work. The people of Nelson Mandela Bay need to get rid of the ANC. They don't want to give them an extension and a lifeline. And we also don't want to find ourselves in some quasi-coalition with the ANC. We can't trust them, we can't work with them, and they've proven that they failed the people of Nelson Mandela Bay.
Let's end it with Muchete Tenda, who says the DA in Nelson Mandela Bay must realize that the people are tired of lies and empty promises. Therefore, they are governing there because of a coalition. If they want to maintain and keep it, they need to deliver services to the people. I don't think you can argue with that, especially the last part of that tweet.
Absolutely. Wonderful.
Mr. Odendaal, let me thank you very much for your time. And once again, best of luck for everything else, at least for the sake of the people of that metro.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening.
That's the new mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, following, of course, that vote, wee hours of this morning, where they got a very tiny majority, but they won nevertheless. So he is now the new mayor. Hopefully, his administration will end the 6 years of chaos, lack of service delivery, squabbles, bitter infighting that has been going on in that municipality. After the break, the National Development Plan turns 10 today. But has it delivered the goods? That's the question we're asking. Welcome back. 10 years ago today, amid fanfare, South Africa's blueprint for economic development and prosperity was adopted. The National Planning Commission advises the government on the implementation of the plan. And Dr. Spamandla Zondi is one of the commissioners who serve in that structure. My second guest is Phyllis Ngomo, a social justice activist and development economist, also the chairperson of Oxfam. Good evening to both of you, and thank you so much for your time.
Hi, good evening, Vuyo. Good evening to the listeners.
Good evening to Phyllis, and good evening to Vuyo.
Dr. Zondi, do we have something, much, if anything, to celebrate on this day?
We always have to celebrate the existence of a vision and a plan that is meant to address the totality of public policy challenges. You always have to celebrate that you have that finally in 2012 after a long period in search of it. You also have to celebrate that after a huge struggle to get South Africa to accept the idea of having a single overall plan, something we're not used to, happened. That we have to celebrate that the organs of civil society, parliament, and other oversight body have agreed that perhaps one of the best ways to do oversight over the performance of government is to base it on a plan that is not a government plan, but it's a national plan. Lastly, we have to celebrate that we have a framework through which we can customize, domesticate all our international commitments that are there. But we have to worry about the level of implementation of this plan, which is a problem that is faced by all public policies and acts in South Africa, our ability to implement and implement fully.
And that's
we
what
also
going to
have to worry about the extent to which there is sufficient leadership behind the plan to make sure that by 2030, we have indeed the society that we envisaged in the plan.
And that's what we're going to talk about in a moment. But from your vantage point, Phyllis, do we have much, if anything?
No, actually, there's absolutely nothing. In fact, I feel for Dr. Spamandla Zondi that we can't celebrate a consensus, by the way. I mean, 10 years and even 28 years into democratic dispensation. I think the unemployment statistics shows actually, a very clear, a vivid picture that we've not moved. Firstly, you have 40% of black women who are unemployed, disengaged economically, 66% of young people who are unemployed, disengaged economically. But also interestingly, actually in the document, in the diagnosis, there are several things that they highlight, about 9 points, which are actually quite nice. And I often say that one of the best things about South African government is that we are very good in diagnosis analysis. But I think the key issue, it's about what's the right tools in as far as how to correct the problems we're confronted with. One of the things they're talking about employment issues, they're talking about race relations in this country, they're talking about corruption, they're talking about state of the economy, they're talking about public health care, they're talking about a spatial division, I mean, you name it. And when you start using that as a yardstick to actually measure and see exactly what's happening in South Africa right now. So, I mean, the unemployment rate consistently, actually, we've seen an increase in the last 18 years. And even you can see some of the economic performance is actually beginning at the time where you were expecting that we should be going through a phase of recovery and pre-COVID phase, but there's actually very little. Though there's very little to celebrate, I do think that, I mean, I feel for those who are currently serving as commissioners because they have to recognize this document. But the key issue, which I think the current commissioners will have to deal with, is the fact that the NDP has not been integrated within the public sector planning system. It's not been resourced, right? So in essence, you have two parallel systems. We have systems where government departments are planning on what they think they should be doing, and where the NDP is actually gathering dust, which is actually meant to be a vision that should be guiding the development discourse of this country.
In fact, Dr. Zondi, I mean, you mentioned leadership. And from where many people are concerned, that's precisely why as Pelisa just said, this document is gathering dust somewhere. There is no leadership with both the capacity and the will to actually implement what is there. Notwithstanding, issues that other people have, been raised about around various aspects of the plan itself. But there is that consensus broadly, and the issue, people say, is the lack of leadership where it matters. People who, among other things, are going to do exactly what Pelisa was saying, and that is to resource the plan.
Yes. I agree that there is a challenge of leadership generally in South Africa, but in relation to the implementation of this plan, there is a real problem with leadership. The plan itself does indicate that in order to achieve the goals that we want to achieve, we need a capable and a developmental state marked by strong, inclusive leadership that is decisive about things that need to be done. It is not a plan problem that we have a leadership issue. It is a South African problem that we have leadership issues at local level, leadership issue at provincial level, at the national level. We have leadership issue in the church, in the civil society, leadership issue in political parties, as you see right now. It's a generic leadership in the state-owned enterprise, even in the private sector, by the way. It's a general challenge that you have, and when you have it as deep as you have in the government, it does take away from what the vision was in order to get that done. But it's not a problem that cannot be fixed. It simply needs will to lead. It means will to institutionalize planning. It needs the will to lead in a manner that that is measured by making a difference in the lives of the people, especially the people on the margins. And that is what we must keep raising, that we need this leadership. We need it to manifest not just at a political level in government, but at a bureaucratic level as well. Not just only in government, outside government as well. Because it's a national plan, it is not a government plan.
But then, does it not bother you, Dr. Zondi, that people like you, you look at the 20-odd people that form the National Planning Commission. These are eminent, South Africans. You have expertise in various aspects of our lives, of the economy, and so on. Then when you are brought together to be this brains trust that advises a government that you say has no capacity, no willingness to actually do what needs to be done. What does it do to you? What does that put you as people who have agreed to serve in that structures that are supposed to help the government do the right things? Because then, as far as some people are concerned, it only means that these bodies are merely set up to either rubber stamp, or to basically be there so that someone pretends something is actually being done when the opposite is true. Does that not bother you?
What it does do to all of us is that it gives us a good sense of the graphic detail of a problem we talk about in generic terms. So when we talk about the crisis of leadership, when we talk about the diminishing capacity of the state, when we talk about the lack of social compact between the state, civil society, and business and all that, you see it in greater detail when we're in these bodies, because we have to engage with this at a very close level. Then you realize how huge our problem is. But it also gives you a sense of a little bit of pragmatism. When I'm outside this process, I have easy solutions. But when I'm in this process, I realize the solutions aren't easy. There's a human dimension here, there's a systemic dimension here, there is a political culture, societal culture dimension here. So I can see what Rwanda does with its plan to change lives very quickly. But then I can realize that we don't have the culture of Rwanda or of Singapore or of Taiwan or of Vietnam in South Africa. You just get to realize how much more complex the issues are. And then we spend a lot of time thinking about what are the low-hanging fruits, what are those things that are possible to do that if we are able to get government to do and other social partners to do, maybe it will ripple into positive effect and change the vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle. It is a work that is persistent, that changes every day. You can't just give up on South Africa until we have made some effort in the direction that we want to do, but it's a difficult one.
One of the things your National Planning Commission is tasked with is this big social compact. The document itself, that there had to be consensus built around it, buy-in from everyone. As we speak, the social compact that the president promised, that his deadline passed, I think, about 3 months ago. That still hasn't been happening. And we have the National Planning Commission, which also has that task to deal with that. What is that telling us? Because at about the same time, you have a whole lot of civil society groupings raising quite forcefully issues from obviously their respective vantage points. You have people agitating for grants, increases in grants, more people need to be reached. You have other people saying we're sitting on a time bomb where there could be unrest on any day, and this will spell disaster from, the unemployment rate, needless to say. So what is this telling us about the buy-in that everyone has been saying was one of the important things around the national development plan, when you have all these groupings now very frustrated, and raising issues quite sharply, and being quite critical in terms of the government and its handling of these issues.
I just want to deal with one point that Dr. Zondi is raising, which I think it's on the contrary of the point he's making. He says when you get into the commission, you get to understand the complexity and the systematic issues around the implementation. One of the key things, by the way, about South Africans, and particularly communities, is that in fact they are so ready to be part of a development agenda that they fully understand what it means to them and how it will impact their lives. The issue that has been really a problem about how government actually implements this program is the fact that they've actually taken an approach of top-down approach, right? And the top-down approach is always going to be met with a lot of resistance, right? And that's why, in essence, we'll always assume that, in fact, it's actually difficult to implement certain programs. That's the first thing. I think the second issue is that if you look at how South Africans participate in the process of the independent development plans across the country, it actually indicates that South Africans are actually quite keen to see the development agenda. But in essence, because there's a top-down approach, but also there's a lot of liberalism that has been embedded into public governance, which in fact more often than not is not meeting the needs of the people. Now, coming back to your question around the multiple views that are coming up, part of the reason why you have multiple views is the fact that the National Development Plan has not achieved anything, right? So people are losing hope. So every interest group that believes that it needs to contribute something into the public discourse, they're actually going to contribute. For example, one of the key issues as heterodox economics we've been raising is that, it's a misnomer for such an industrialized country to spend 10% of its GDP on industrial development and spend 60% on social security. What type of a society are we actually truly developing, right? Now, the risk that actually the commissioners are confronted with is that the more you don't implement the NDP and it just remains a consensus document that is not resourced, that has no proper capacity, is that actually you are following a moving target, because poverty, social inequality is actually not going to wait for you. And I think the data shows it. One of the key things, for example, that the commissioners must start looking at, from this conversation tonight, look at the increased economic migration in this country, okay? But which is actually, there's even a contrasting evidence, though, that while people are actually economically migrating from their own homes, but still they continue to build decent homes in terms of their own ancestral homes, right? What are that signals? It signals very clearly that in fact people are, firstly, if they can afford to build a house, they will certainly build a decent house for themselves without relying from the state. The second issue is that they signals that actually we would like to stay at home, interact with our families on a daily basis, have access to economic opportunities where we live without having to live double lives. Black South Africans specifically actually live double lives. For 11 months, they live in the cities in a small informal settlement where there are no abolition facilities, there's no access to electricity, there's no access to water. But in fact, they do invest in access to abolition facilities, water, and electricity in their own ancestral homes. What does that mean? And I think for me, the more actually we're not able to read the signals, right? That where South Africans wants to be, and the fact that they can actually resource their own development. All they require is a state that is able to support it now. So what you then do is you need to be able to decentralize your industrial activities to support exactly what actually people are starting to signal. Our economy cannot rely on 3 provinces. Western Cape, Gauteng, and KwaZulu-Natal. I think it's quite clear that the other 6 provinces are actually saying that we also want to have a stake. But at the heart of it as well is that you need to support those provinces. Now, there's an argument about the state capacity and its ability to actually deliver. But we've seen, though, wages growing within the public sector, but also at the same time we've seen more recruitment. One of the key issues, again, which is an inherent risk, is the fact that because the NDP has not been implemented, what the state has been doing has been hiring an inappropriate capacity, right? So if in the structure we wanted to have Pelisa as an assistant director to do stakeholder management, but in fact society is actually presenting a completely different discourse in as far as what type of expertise it requires from the state. The other issue as well, there's just way too much central planning. South African citizens are showing that central planning is actually not working. We are looking for decentralized planning. We want to hear and see exactly what is happening within our own
information. The buzzword is the district development model.
Well, it needs to be resourced, that district development model, by the way. And I think for the first time, perhaps it's one of the instrument unto which where South Africans are likely to rally. But at the same time, you also need to resource it. And part of the resourcing is that you need finance, you need technical capacity, but at the heart of it as well, you need to embed economic transformation, right? Amongst the district development model that needs to do, it needs to make it sure that municipalities' procurement budget is spent within my community in Butterworth, right? It's not spent on entrepreneurs who are based in Gauteng, who travel back to Butterworth to go and get opportunities and take out the money. So there's a massive rethinking, and that rethinking, by the way, ordinary South Africans know what needs to be done.
Well, but it's the palms of the people who matter. But we have run out of time, but I wanted to end on this one, Dr. Zondi, if I may. You recently called for emergency measures to deal with the rolling blackouts. And it doesn't look like we are anywhere near. I mean, earlier, a couple of hours ago, when we expected a reprieve, we were told that the stage 5 is going on until well into the weekend. And we've just received news now that a briefing that was supposed to be held tomorrow morning by your leader, the person who heads the National Planning Commission, minister in the presidency, has since been postponed. Yet this is on the back of a president coming back from, or having to come back from his trip abroad to attend to this matter. I don't know if you're privy to the goings on, but your thoughts, final thought on the electricity situation and what you think can be done.
Like Parliament, the role of advisory bodies is to speak the truth as much as they can and to provide the best advice that it can provide, and to point things in the direction that we can do, including endorsing what my sister was just saying now, decentralizing planning and all of those kind of things. You can say all of those things, But if there is no capacity to absorb the ideas you have, it still will not work. But you still do not give up. You keep trying, even on that idea of declaring a ring-fenced emergency around this, so that you are able to release funds, so that you are able to capacity in order to deal with this thing in a heavy way, was an idea put forward. But there was never an illusion on the side of the Planning Commission that its advices are forms of instructions. We understand that the people who are elected to run government have that mandate, and they have the final word on what got decided. They can take any advice they can hear, even from this program, but they can also ignore the advice that get, perhaps with good reason. Consider it, but decide to go for other advices they get from other bodies as well.
Dr. Spamandla Zondi, Pelisangoma, let me thank both of you for agreeing to come on the program this evening, albeit we only scratched the surface of what this conversation should be about. Well, 10 years since its adoption, everyone seems to agree that we are nowhere near where we could be had this been implemented, even though there's so much consensus around it. Lack of leadership, will, resources to actually get behind it is what, or among the things that are missing. We were, of course, going to preview that briefing that Minister in the Presidency, Mondli Gugubela, was going to give tomorrow morning to talk us through what Cabinet has decided earlier this week, or in fact yesterday, at its meeting, but that briefing has since been postponed. We'll see if tomorrow we'll be able to pick up on the issues we wanted to raise with you, because they continue to be relevant. For tonight, though, that's our show. Do join us again tomorrow night, same time. Have a good night.